Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel, Lotus Floss. I'm your host, Gilberto. The title of today's show is The Power and Value of Suffering. Suffering is a part of life, as is pain. Pain cannot be avoided, and what I mean by that is physical pain. Suffering can, but there is, like I said before in the title of this episode, there is power and value in suffering. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Buddhism, but in Buddhism, they call suffering dukkha. And really, suffering is created by the mind. It's attachments, craving, longing, stories that our mind tells us about reality. And depending on the stories and attachments that we add to outside circumstances, i.e. reality, it can create suffering. For instance, let's say somebody compliments you on your shirt, and they smile in a way that you think it's them being sarcastic. And then all of a sudden you start saying, oh, well, they must be making fun of me. They're not complimenting, they're making fun of me. And you start worrying about what other people think. You start worrying about whether or not they're being sincere. And maybe you might go through some anger at the person, or any negative emotion. And that might not be the case. That person might have honestly been telling you a compliment. But because of the attachment that you had to what that person said, or the story that your mind was telling you, you perceive reality in a certain way. And that perceived reality might not actually be what's really happening on the outside world. Hence, that's suffering. It's a construct of the mind. Now, there is a silver lining in suffering. And what I mean by that is that these moments and situations that our mind creates, where it creates suffering, this can be a positive thing. One, it allows you to practice awareness. It's an opportunity for growth. And yes, while you're in the middle of it, it's not pleasant. Like everything in life, life is constant change. The suffering too will pass. I've found in my own experience some of the most unpleasant and really deep suffering moments of my life have been a huge catalyst to change. And when I look back on it now, I wouldn't have changed the way it happened, because it allowed me to have huge growth. And that's one of the things I mean by there's power in suffering, and there's also value in suffering. While sometimes you might not be able to see that when you're in the midst of suffering, it is there, and there's definitely a silver lining. And like I said before, suffering can be a big catalyst to change. And sometimes our suffering is presented to us so that we deal with it. The universe has a way of, when we put out there, I want to change, I want to be a better person. Well, it'll either start bringing up these emotions and traumas that we haven't dealt with. And you're thinking to yourself, well, geez, this isn't what I asked for. I asked for change. Well, that's how the universe brings it to you. It wants to test you. It wants to see whether or not you're serious about change. And also, it understands what you need in order to change. Again, I know some of these concepts are kind of hard to understand and accept, but when you go through them, you'll understand what I mean. Now, self-improvement and the spiritual path is full of lots of suffering and setbacks. And while that may sound pessimistic and negative, it is a part of the journey. Yes, there are people who have had instant enlightenment or have had, oh my gosh, I forget the term that they use. But basically, they're relieved of their suffering instantaneously. That's very rare. Most of us have to go down this journey of suffering. And while it might seem like, boy, this is, spirituality and self-improvement are supposed to be about growth, supposed to be about finding meaning and happiness and utter contentment and peace. Yes, that is the goal that one should obtain. But on that path, all these setbacks and suffering are so you can attain that. Now, let me ask you something. If you just instantly attain enlightenment, and by the way, enlightenment, you reach it, it's always a constant, goal. It's you're, how do I put this? It's not like you're enlightened, you attain enlightenment and life is great and dandy, It's just a peace, a deep inner peace and contentment that you feel. You still have problems and issues, yes, but they no longer affect you like they used to when you were operating out of ignorance. So on this path, try to view suffering and setbacks as a gift, as a way of practicing the tools and techniques that you learn along this path. And not so much that as a failure and that you're doing this wrong, because it can get really dark for a while there. There's this scene in, I think it was Empire Strikes Back, where Luke Skywalker is talking to Yoda, and he tells Yoda, "I'm not scared." And Yoda looks at him and goes, "Good, you will be. You will be." And I remember seeing that as a kid, and that kind of creeped me out there. But Yoda understood that while Luke Skywalker was enthusiastic and, said, "Oh, I'm not scared," he will be scared along this path of becoming a Jedi Master. It's the same way along the path to enlightenment or spirituality or self-improvement, whatever you want to call it. Now, some of the ways that you can deal with this suffering is by practicing the technique of letting go by David R. Hawkins, Dr. David R. Hawkins. He wrote a book called Letting Go. I suggest that you read it. And basically, you say, okay, well, let's bring up the emotion, anger. Okay, well, I'm feeling anger. And you just sit there with it. And you don't judge your anger. You don't try to fight it like, oh, I don't want to feel this way. You just allow it to be. and just sit with it. Have compassion for yourself. Like I said in a previous episode, imagine that you're on a bridge and your emotions are the water passing underneath you, and you're just watching the water pass underneath you with no attachments. Or imagine yourself that you're watching a movie and you're starring in that movie, but you're down off the stage looking at yourself, and you're like practicing. You're not emotionally involved in that because you're not in the stage, you're in the seats, and you're emotionally detached from whatever emotion. In this instance, we're talking about anger. That's one way of dealing with it. Another way is through meditation. Now, obviously, there are instances where we can't go into meditation. But even in those instances, if you do feel anger, let's say you're talking to somebody and you feel anger at somebody, just say, okay, I feel this emotion. That's fine, and just allow it to be. So I hoped this episode helped you some, and I'll be teaching more tools and techniques and episodes farther down the road. But I just wanted to make this video short and quick and explain the value and power in suffering. And I hoped that helped. Till next time, take care. Peace.